winning a Grammy is it's kind of it, really, for in the record business. And
Petula Clark's voice saved millions during World War II, but nobody could save her from the men who controlled her career. She was rejected, harassed, and cheated for decades. While audiences heard joy in her songs, she was drowning in depression. Her marriage crumbled under the weight of secrets she couldn't tell. In 2023, at age 90, she almost lost the voice that made her famous. The woman who brought happiness to the world spent her life fighting battles nobody knew about. The truth is devastating. Petula Clark came into the world as Sally Olwyn Clark on November 15, 1932, in Ewell, Surrey. She grew up in a small home near Long Grove Hospital, where both her parents worked as nurses. Money was tight, and the Great Depression sat heavy on every family around them. Petula helped with chores, with siblings, and sometimes even with patients. Life moved slowly, but it moved with purpose. Those early years taught her how to care for people, and that gentle way of seeing the world slipped into her voice long before the world knew her name. Her father had a playful streak. One day he took the names of two old girlfriends, Pet and Ulla, mixed them together, and created Petula. He said it sounded cheerful in a time when most families needed something to smile about. She later confirmed the story herself, and it always showed how her family lived with imagination, even when life wasn't easy. Her mother, Doris, was a trained soprano, and she noticed something in Petula's voice almost as soon as she could talk. By the time Petula was 5, she was learning folk songs like Mighty Lack a Rose and singing them at family gatherings. The world outside was cold and uncertain, but her voice warmed the room she stood in. These little performances trained her confidence, one tiny moment at a time. Everything changed when she was 7. In 1939, she stood on a small stage and mimicked famous radio singers like Vera Lynn. Teachers noticed right away. They told her to keep going. Britain was drifting into war, and a child with a bright voice felt like a sudden bit of hope. That moment opened doors. She started performing more often, bringing comfort to troops and to people listening at home. Life at home stayed simple. Hospital shifts ruled the family's routine. Petula watched her parents pour kindness into their work and into the people around them. It shaped her. It made her steady. Even as she became more visible on the radio, she remained the girl who helped with dishes, wiped tables, and listened to others with patience. That empathy showed in everything she did. By 1939, she was secretly recording her own little demos on her father's old gramophone. She practiced imitating Shirley Temple and other stars, whispering songs into the crackling speaker. When her parents found out, they simply smiled and let her keep going. It was harmless, and it gave her joy during the rising tension of the war. Then came the night that changed her life. On October 17, 1942, at just 9 years old, she sang Mighty Lack a Rose on the BBC Empire service for a program called It's All Yours. She dedicated it to her uncle who was stationed in Iraq. The country was tired. Air raid sirens screamed through the dark, but her small voice felt like a calm moment in the middle of chaos. Hundreds of letters arrived at the BBC afterward. People said she brought them comfort. They asked to hear her again, and she did sing again, even during raids, performing for children hiding underground. By the end of 1942, she was appearing on BBC Radio every week. Soon, she was called Britain's Shirley Temple and radio's Merry Mimic. On December 20th, 1942, she performed at the Queensberry All Services Club, now known as the Prince Edward Theatre. More than 500 troops watched her. She sang patriotic songs and made them laugh. She was only 10, but she already understood how much people needed relief. And before she turned 12, she had done more than 500 concerts for ENSA. She traveled through blackout zones on trains, visiting evacuated children and soldiers. She performed during raids, even while German V-1 rockets rattled the walls around her. She never stopped. When she was 10, she began hosting her own BBC show called Pet's Parlor. She sang, interviewed soldiers, read letters from families, and adapted lyrics for special requests. Every week she tried to lift someone's spirits. Thousands of messages arrived from around the world. Even at that age, she knew how to make people feel seen. Her radio success led to film. In 1944, she appeared in Medal for the General. She played a street child singing I'm Going to Be a Lucky Girl. Air raids were still hitting the city when the movie premiered. Critics praised her for being real and honest, even at such a young age. This role opened the door to the cinema world, and she kept moving through it. During the Blitz, she sang in bomb shelters at just 8 years old. Families huddled together, shaking as V-1 rockets fell, and she would sing White Cliffs of Dover to calm them. Her courage built something strong inside her. It stayed with her through every stage of her life. But right after the war, everything shifted. In May 1945, only weeks after VE Day, the BBC dropped her. She was 13. They called her a wartime novelty. They said they didn't need child singers anymore. That rejection cut deep. She spent the next 2 years away from the spotlight, studying at secretarial school and auditioning quietly for West End roles. She was rejected again and again. Too young, not the right type. The glow of war was gone, and the world didn't know what to do with her. She kept going anyway. Even during that difficult period, her film work continued. At age 12, she had filmed I Know Where I'm Going. It was shot in the Scottish Hebrides during one of the coldest winters on record. She pushed through freezing winds, rain, and long days on remote islands. She showed discipline that surprised everyone. That professionalism became her signature. Then came Strawberry Roan. In 1945, she played a girl who loved horses, even though she had never ridden one. She trained for weeks, learning to ride ponies to prepare for her scenes. The film had a tiny budget of only £10,000, but her performance stood out. Critics said she had natural screen presence and emotional honesty. Slowly, she was proving she could do more than sing. She could act with depth. By 1949, she had appeared in 14 films. She was still a teenager, yet she was already a familiar face in British homes. One of her best-known roles came with the early television series Here Come the Huggets. In 1948, she played a witty teenager in a working-class family. Families loved the show because it felt familiar, and Petula's charm made her unforgettable. For 3 years, the Huggets kept British audiences smiling and helped her move smoothly from radio to film to television. At 16, she signed her first recording contract with EMI Columbia. Her debut single, I Can't Give You Anything But Love, didn't chart, but she met producer George Martin, who later shaped the sound of the Beatles. She remembered how nervous she felt in that studio, but he helped her relax and find her voice. That early session planted the seeds of a long music career. But her journey was not untouched by the darker parts of the industry. In 1947, at just 15, her agent pushed her toward suggestive modeling jobs to boost her fame. She refused every offer. People argued with her, saying it would help her career, but she held her ground. She wanted to be respected. That firm choice protected her at a time when many young performers were exploited. It showed how strong she already was. Petula Clark was only 17 when she stepped into 1954 with a song that sounded light and playful, but carried her straight into the spotlight. The Little Shoemaker came out in June that year and moved up to number 7 on the UK singles chart. It stayed there for 12 weeks, which was huge for a young artist who was still learning what fame really felt like. The song had started its life in France, and her producer, Alan A. Freeman, shaped it into something bright and catchy. People heard it everywhere. In Australia, it went all the way to number 1, proving she wasn't just a local success. The record came out under the Polygon label, and the money she earned from it helped her begin turning from a child actor into a rising pop name. By the end of 1954, she was already a familiar voice in British homes, and her path toward stardom was starting to open. 1 year later, in December 1955, suddenly There's a Valley pushed her even higher. It reached number 9 in the UK and sold more than 200,000 copies. That number was impressive for the mid-50s. She sang it live on Sunday night at the London Palladium, and about 20 million people watched her. Overnight, she became a teen sensation. The gentle mood of the song fit her voice perfectly, and the national exposure made her one of the strongest young female vocalists in Britain. Newspapers wanted interviews, radio wanted more, and audiences wanted her voice again and again. A new chapter arrived in early 1957 With All My Heart. The song rose to number 3 in the UK and carried a special milestone because the B-side was one she wrote herself. She recorded it at Abbey Road Studios, where she started experimenting with orchestral layers that later shaped her sound. The production felt rich and warm, something more polished than the simple pop tunes flooding the market. She was learning fast, writing more, and beginning to see a future built on music alone. Around the same time, something bold happened. In 1956, she recorded in French for the first time with Chariot, the song that would later become I Will Follow Him. It topped the Belgian charts and spread across Europe. A British girl singing in French was unusual, even risky, but she didn't let that stop her. The response proved she could connect with audiences beyond language. By 1957, she was touring Europe, performing 50 shows in Paris and Brussels with local orchestras. European crowds embraced her, and she became one of the rare British artists to find continental success before the Beatles appeared. Then came Sailor in 1957. The song became her first UK #1. It even outsold the imported Elvis Presley singles that were dominating the shops. A special photo shoot on a yacht floating down the Thames filled the tabloids and made people talk. The song stayed at #1 for weeks and confirmed her as the highest-charting British female artist of the 1950s. Step by step, she was proving she could rise anywhere, with any audience. Her journey through the 50s wasn't only about music. Back in 1952, she starred in The Card, her final major film, before shifting fully toward singing. Between 1952 and 1958, she released 5 singles every year and earned her first Ivor Novello nomination for songwriting. She was one of the few who managed to move from film to music without stumbling. By 1958, she was one of the most influential women in British pop, shaping a path others hoped to follow. Everything changed again in 1960 when she moved to Paris at 27. She signed with Vogue Records France and released Romeo, which sold 1.5 million copies, and turned her into La Petula in France. Up until then, she was known for soft British ballads, but her French debut surprised everyone. She became a continental star, sharing stages with Jacques Brel and Charles Aznavour, and filling venues like the Olympia Theatre. The shift was powerful. It even blended into her personal life because she fell in love with Claude Wolff, whom she married in 1961. Her career in France broke language barriers and placed her among the biggest names in European music. In 1962, she released Ya Ya Twist, a lively French cover of Lee Dorsey's song. It stayed at #1 in France for 12 straight weeks. Her TV performance on Salut les copains reached 15 million viewers, and her energy matched the twist craze sweeping Europe. She brought a softer but electric tone to the dance scene. The song even reached the UK Top 20, which almost never happened with French-language tracks. She won the Grand Prix du Disque Français in 1962, becoming France's top female singer of that year. More bold moves followed. In 1965, she worked with Serge Lama on C'est ma chanson, the French version of This Is My Song by Charlie Chaplin. At first, she didn't want to sing it. She feared the simple lyrics would overshadow her other work in the UK. Claude Wolff convinced her, and she finally recorded it. The French version reached #1 in France. The English version reached #1 in the UK in February 1967 and sold over 500,000 copies. It created tension with Pi Records because they wanted more hits, but she felt the song dominated too much. Still, it added another giant achievement to her career. Another door opened in 1963 when she toured Japan. She became the first Western woman to perform at the Budokan. That stage had been reserved for martial arts and special national events. Her bilingual shows mixed English and French songs and won over Japanese crowds. She outsold huge local stars like Kyu Sakamoto. Her album Petula Clark in Japan topped the charts, and the TV broadcasts reached millions. Japanese audiences were introduced to Western pop music through her performances, and her influence shaped the country's musical taste at a critical moment. In 1964, she pushed her limits again by recording in Italian and Spanish. Ciao Ti Dirò went to #1 in Italy. To match the languages quickly, she trained phonetically, memorizing the lyrics overnight for studio sessions. Her EPs in Spanish and Italian included songs like Petite Fleur and Hello, Dolly. She showed the world she could adapt fast and perform convincingly in multiple languages. Few artists could do that, especially in the early 1960s. Yet, success did not protect her from inequality. In 1962, French promoters paid her half of what they paid male singers like Johnny Hallyday, even when she shared the same billing. She kept letters documenting the unfair treatment, but chose to continue the work to strengthen her base in France. Gender inequality was common in the entertainment world then, and her patience helped clear the way for future women in European music. Then the downtown era arrived. In 1964, Tony Hatch discovered the melody in Paris and brought it to her. She felt it sounded too American at first, but on October 16th, she recorded it in 2 takes at Pi Studios. Hatch even finished writing some lyrics minutes before the session in the studio washroom. The track had more than 30 musicians, including Jimmy Page and Big Jim Sullivan. When it came out in the UK, it climbed to No. 2, held back only by the Beatles and their song I Feel Fine. But something bigger happened. In the United States, it hit #1 on the Billboard Hot 100 in January 1965. It was the first US #1 by a UK female artist since 1952. By the end of that year, Downtown had sold more than 3 million copies. Overnight, she became a global icon. Just weeks later, she arrived on The Ed Sullivan Show. On March 14, 1965, she performed Downtown without any rehearsal because she got there only 45 minutes before going live. About 50 million Americans watched. Her second song, I Know a Place, became a top 10 hit. That night pushed her into the heart of the British invasion and turned her into one of the biggest international stars of the decade. I Know a Place reached #3 in the US. It carried a message inspired by youth culture and the civil rights movement. It suggested a place where everyone could feel welcome. The song needed a 40-piece orchestra to capture the sound Tony Hatch imagined. That richness made it feel bigger than most songs of the era. Young listeners connected to it deeply, especially in countries where racial tension was part of everyday life. On April 2, 1968, something quiet and powerful happened on live television. Petula Clark and Harry Belafonte were singing an anti-war duet on her NBC special when she reached out and touched his arm. It was simple. It was gentle. It lasted only a moment, yet it became the first time a white woman touched a black man on primetime television in the United States. The sponsor, Chrysler, panicked the second they saw it. They wanted the scene reshot with the two of them standing apart. They feared angry calls from Southern viewers, but Petula refused. Her husband, who produced the show, stood with her. They kept the moment as it was. When the episode aired unchanged, the country erupted. Letters poured in. Some were full of praise. Others carried death threats. Belafonte even considered boycotting Plymouth cars on The Tonight Show until he was told the executive who complained had acted out of panic, not company policy. Even so, the moment stayed. It broke a rule that had held for too long, and it turned into a civil rights milestone. A year earlier, in April 1967, Petula released a song that came from a different kind of tension. Don't Sleep in the Subway climbed to #5 in the United States and became one of her biggest hits. The idea came from a real argument she had with Tony Hatch during a London blackout. The lyrics warned against storming out after a fight and ending up in a risky place. In the UK, the word subway meant a pedestrian tunnel, but Hatch used the American meaning to make the song feel broader. New York helped carry it even further. A rainy Times Square billboard campaign placed the song right in the middle of the city's restless energy. The song was pieced together from 3 of Hatch's melodies, shifting from pop to symphonic sounds and then into a bright Beach Boys-style chorus. It earned a Grammy nomination in 1968, but lost to Up, Up and Away. Still, it topped charts in Australia and became her final US top 10 hit, proving how wide her appeal had grown. Her stage career didn't fade either. In 1993, she stepped into Blood Brothers on Broadway as Mrs. Johnstone. The show had struggled at first, but when she joined the cast, something shifted. Crowds grew, reviews softened. She carried the role with such emotional force that she became one of the production's core pillars. She stayed with the show on its U.S. tour in 1994 and 1995, but her journey to that point had started much earlier. In 1970, she led a London revue simply called Petula. She performed 300 shows in a one-woman format and drew talk of Olivier Award-level work. When she returned to the West End in later years, she did it with ease. She showed she wasn't only a pop star, she was a full performer with a long breadth of skill behind her. Another chapter took her into the orbit of Charlie Chaplin. He asked her to record "This Is My Song" for his 1967 film A Countess from Hong Kong. She tried to refuse at first because the English lyrics sounded too old-fashioned to her. She wanted to record in French, but the studio pushed for English. Chaplin's perfectionism slowed the sessions to a crawl and delayed the song's release by months. She thought it would disappear. She even hid it as an album track, but Pi Records released it as a UK single against her wishes. In February 1967, it hit #1. Soon it reached #3 in the United States and #4 in Canada. What started as a reluctant project became an international hit, pulling Clark and Chaplin into the same piece of music history. Not every experience was pleasant. In 1968, while performing in Las Vegas, she crossed paths with Elvis Presley. During a private suite meeting, he made an advance she rejected immediately. She later described it as uncomfortable. Elvis had built a reputation for pushing boundaries with women, often using his entourage to smooth over resistance. Petula walked out of the room and kept her distance. She stayed professional, but the sting of that moment followed her for years. Her Grammy success came with its own bold decision. She won Best Rock and Roll Recording in 1966 for I Know a Place, but she boycotted the ceremony. Female artists were being paid less than male performers, even when nominated for the same awards. She refused to show up. It wasn't widely covered in the press, but it turned into one of the earliest public stands against gender pay gaps in the music industry. Artists later pointed to that choice as a rare moment of resistance during a time when most stayed silent. Her career shifted many times, especially between ages 41 and 60. The early 1970s hit her hard when disco swept the United States. Her 1971 single, I Don't Know How to Love Him, reached #13, but her planned U.S. tours were canceled because of low ticket sales. It was a shock, so she pivoted. She moved toward cabaret and smaller club tours in Australia and Asia. In 1972, she toured Australia with a small band, relying on jazz standards and intimate performances. It was a new chapter. Instead of stadiums, she sang to crowds who wanted closeness and storytelling. The shift allowed her to rebuild her path in her own way. By 1974, she found her way back onto British screens with a BBC variety show called Petula. It ran for 12 episodes. One night, David Bowie appeared while he was shaping his young American sound. He arrived in the middle of his own artistic rebirth, creating a moment where both he and Petula were stepping into new versions of themselves. Her show also featured Peter Ustinov, Telly Savalas, and the Pointer Sisters. It pulled her back into the UK spotlight at a time when she needed it most. Even though she had moved to Geneva in 1966 to raise her family, she returned to the West End in the 1980s with the musical Someone Like You. In 1984, she performed more than 200 shows at the Strand Theatre. The production mixed her classic hits with new material, and it worked. Audiences lined up. Critics praised her. At 52, she proved she still had the presence to lead a West End production and hold a crowd with ease. Then came another surprise. In 1988, she released Downtown 88, a high-energy remix produced by Stock Aitken Waterman. It reached #10 in the UK and introduced her to dance music fans. She promoted it on Top of the Pops, and suddenly, a new generation knew her name. At 55, she reinvented herself again, but behind the applause, she kept facing old battles. In 1975, she discovered a U.S. label was paying her 40% less than male artists for the reissue of her album Petula Clark's Hit Parade. She sued. The case settled quietly, but it turned into another early example of a woman challenging unfair treatment in the music industry. In 1991, she performed at the Royal Variety Performance for Queen Elizabeth II. Her gown shimmered with 500 sequins as she sang Downtown and Don't Sleep in the Subway. Millions watched. It became one of her last major royal engagements, and a graceful moment that summed up her standing in British culture. At age 68 in 2000, she stepped into Sunset Boulevard on Broadway as Norma Desmond. She completed 15 preview shows before a sudden health issue forced her to step back. Even so, her performance left a mark. She later recorded the 2001 studio cast album, which earned her a Tony nomination. It was unusual for someone her age, but she had always defined her own pace. In 2013, at age 80, she recorded Lost in You in Nashville. The album blended her classic style with country influences. It charted in the UK and France and carried 12 tracks that mixed live Nashville musicians with her familiar British sound. It reached younger listeners while keeping her longtime fans close. 2 years later, in 2015, she walked onto the Glastonbury stage at 82. More than 100,000 people waited to hear Downtown. When she sang it, the crowd erupted. The clip went viral. The BBC even made a special about her appearance. It reminded everyone just how long her songs had lived. Her memoir in 2024, with sprinkles on top, opened doors she had kept closed for decades. She revealed moments fans had never heard, including a surprising confession that she once turned down a Beatles duet in 1965 because of a scheduling conflict. The book became a bestseller because it mixed her successes with her shadows. People wanted to hear the truth from her own voice. In 2022, her 90th birthday concert at the Royal Albert Hall pushed boundaries again. Holograms of her younger self appeared on stage beside her, creating duets across time. 5,000 people filled the hall. More than 1 million watched online. The mix of technology and memory wrapped her legacy into something new. Then came a difficult year. In 2023, she contracted COVID and needed vocal cord surgery. For the first time in more than 80 years of performing, she feared losing her voice, but she recovered. By 2024, she was back on stage in Europe, singing with the same calm strength she had carried her whole life. Her personal life held its own chapters of joy and loneliness. She married Claude Wolfe on June 8, 1961, and he managed her career for decades. Their marriage shifted over time. By the 1990s, they lived separate lives while staying married and raising their 3 children. When Wolfe died on March 20, 2024, at age 93, she described the grief as overwhelming. She said she was lost for words. The silence between them in later years made the loss even heavier. It forced her to face the long stretch of shared history that had slowly grown distant. Motherhood carried its own cost. Through the 1970s, she flew constantly between Geneva and Las Vegas. She tried to give her children time, but the schedule always pushed back. She missed school events and holidays. Her performances suffered. Her family time suffered. She admitted later that she lived in a constant tug of guilt, trying to be everything at once, and often feeling that neither side received enough of her. The industry itself tested her in darker ways. In 1965, a producer invited her to a hotel room under the guise of business, and then tried to corner her. She escaped. She stayed silent because she feared losing everything. Her fame through the mid-1960s brought more pressure, including moments like the dressing room visit with Elvis Presley that ended quickly when his comments crossed a line. Those experiences were part of a wider pattern faced by women in entertainment, where silence felt like the only form of protection. Years earlier, at age 13 in 1945, she had already felt the sting of rejection when the BBC dismissed her as irrelevant after the war. She had entertained troops throughout World War II, only to find herself pushed aside when audiences moved on. The loss triggered a depression she kept hidden. It shaped the careful way she carried herself for decades. Even though her voice brought joy to millions, and Downtown sold more than 70 million copies, she struggled privately. Therapy in the 2000s helped her unravel the years of hurt. From industry betrayals to the end of her marriage, she learned how to make space for her own healing after years spent performing brightness for others. The 1968 moment with Belafonte brought threats again. After the broadcast, strangers sent warnings and hateful letters. Chrysler and NBC tried to push for a safer version, but Petula and Wolfe had already destroyed 7 alternate takes. The historic touch stayed. She toured with armed security after that. She knew the risk. She chose integrity anyway. And that choice followed her throughout the rest of her life, becoming one more piece of a long career shaped by courage, reinvention, and a voice that refused to disappear.